if you're
Yeah.
having anxiety over what the EV market will be when we're all driving EVs, well, Norway's already there. 25% of the vehicles on the road in Norway are electric. And 90% have a plug of new car sales. And next year in 2025, they're hoping to get that to zero, except for vans, or will be accepted for a little while. But yeah, they've done all kinds of things all the way back to the 90s. You can see a chart here of all the different things they've done. And it's just, it worked. And people didn't
Yeah.
scream. I mean, some people scream, but for the most part, society has accepted it and been quite happy because, at some point, there's so many of them around that that they're not bad things. They're good
Yeah, and
things.
because they started doing this decades ago, it's been a more gradual transition where I think it's a bit of a struggle in the US right now because, Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a fairly fast transition because, the US was kind of behind.
Now, the Norway power grid is largely powered by low carbon hydro, and they're adding renewables to that as well as they add electricity, and the hydro will be used as kind of the base load and even as a battery if they turn it off for a while and get some of the water. So this was the CNBC's reporter's first time driving an EV when she rented a BMW in Oslo. So that there was that. This is kind of quite a contrast to the story the CBC Marketplace did a couple weeks ago, where they were looking for negative things. It seemed like a very different way of approaching this. So she had a few hiccups, but not much. The reporter noticed the quiet streets and the lack of fumes, which was quite amazing.
The streets are quiet in Oslo. The air is pleasantly free of fumes.
There's been a noticeable improvement to the air quality in the city?
Yeah, it is. So around 20% reduction of local pollution.
It was actually noticeable when a gas-powered car sputtered by. We did find a few people who still drove gas-powered cars. Some couldn't afford to buy a new car, and others still couldn't get past range anxiety for long trips, despite the abundance of chargers.
My son took me for a drive in his combustion vehicle yesterday, and I couldn't tell if it was working hard and not working well, or if it was just the combustion thing, because he says, Dad, you haven't been in a combustion vehicle for a while. What do you think? And I said, well, I'm not sure. Is it working properly, or is it just always this way? So it's a different experience. Like, you really hear those things working when you press the pedal.
Yeah, they can be kind of noisy and not great.
Also in Oslo and Norway, all the ferries, all of them are electric now. I don't think we've said that on the show. We've talked about them getting ferries, but all of them are now electric.
Wow.
And they're like a megawatt chargers that they pull up to. It's quite huge. And the trains are electric, and trucking is transitioning quickly to electric. And they're actually getting rid of subsidies for PHEVs now. That's the hybrids that plug in and have a little bit of all electric range. They're not going to incentivize those anymore. They're going to be treated the same as gas cars pretty quick. Here's another clip.
Would you say that the environment is a very important piece to why people are buying electric vehicles here, or is it the price of the cars?
I don't think Norwegians are more environmentally concerned than other people. So it's the economic that is the most important. Climate emissions is, of course, a nice bonus and also important for a small group of people.
Yeah, I find that here, Brian, that, we're all motivated by the climate, but really it's the technology that we're going for and the economics, right? I mean, that's... Very few people are doing it for the climate. I know a few, but largely, it's not their first concern. It's a benefit. It's a side benefit.
And especially if you drive a lot, the more you drive, well, guess what? That's, a gas bill that you don't have to pay for, sometimes a gigantic one if you drive a lot.
In Norway, the restaurant chain McDonald's finds itself competing with gas stations, which they now, by the way, call energy stations. Because they're just not gas, it's electricity, it's energy stations. So that might be something that we could look forward to the future, a name change. You may have heard it here first, energy stations instead of gas stations. They still are operating on low margins, The electricity is a low margin, is the same as the gas, but it's getting them in to buy the high markup items like a Coke or whatever.
Yeah, and McDonald's in Norway, it sounds like they've got chargers at maybe all of their locations.
Yeah, and Burger King has to compete with that. So, because
Yeah.
I, it's true. When you're on a trip, you want to stop where you can get a bite to eat. And I'm not going to be too discerning at this point of the transition, but I'd rather not walk 2 blocks to a restaurant if there's one, 50 yards away and it's a McDonald's. I'm happy to go there. They're not only fueling people, these restaurants, they're fueling the cars. It's a big deal now, and that's something we might be able to look forward to here. Again, this whole thing in Norway it's like looking into the future. And the grid is not collapsing, and there's not that many growing pains actually. One of the biggest problems I think now is that they're finding harder to make grid connections for new charging stations because there's only so much extra power in certain areas, and then they have to sort of, build up the grid in order to put a charger there.
Yeah, each district kind of has a maximum amount of electricity from what I understand. So yeah, sometimes in certain neighborhoods you might be kind of reaching the max without having to do major upgrades on the grid.
Is it actually the gas station company, Circle K, that paid to put these chargers in?
Yeah, so the fast charging market is more or less fully commercial market. Circle K is one of the big fast charging companies in Norway, and also the biggest gasoline chain in Norway.
Are they going to be able to make as much money from charging as they did from gas?
Well, they don't have a big profit on gas either. Mostly it's also the convenience store where they sell food and coffee and drinks. That's also, of course, more relevant for EV owners because when they charge, it takes more time than filling up a tank of gas. So maybe they stay here for 20, 30 minutes. They can make money there as well.
There's a company called Certus that runs this Esso station. We have a deal with them that we split the costs 50-50 for the whole installation here, but then we also split the income 50-50.
So yeah, they talk to charging companies, policymakers in the government, regular people on the street, even somebody who drove gas, to see why, and their excuse was they couldn't afford a car, they claim. Of course, you should keep your old car, for as long as it's useful to you.
Yeah.
If you can. So yeah, they're going to take off the 25% VAT tax. They're taking that off EVs now, but they're going to remove that option soon because there's too many EVs. And they're allowed to drive in the bus lanes. There's many incentives that they had initially, and one was driving in bus lanes, but that's ending now because there's too many EVs in the bus lanes, right?
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
So, but now you have to have a carpool. So if you have multiple people in the car in your EV, you can drive in the bus lanes. So there's no range anxiety, they say, anymore, but charger anxiety. Chargers not working sometimes, but it's much better now, and the payment systems are the biggest pain. So I say to you, Brian, why not have an Interac, like we have in bank machines and things like that, or a Visa Pay or some sort of ubiquitous payment system that pays a little fee to the other person, but you just have one payment method. That's what we need. I don't know what's stopping that.
Yeah, or at least tap to pay as a backup if the app doesn't work or something.
So here's a list of some of the interesting things I learned, and I did find it quite fascinating. Gas stations, like I said, are now called energy stations because the chargers are more important. Bad, I guess this is the pushing of the buying of EVs was too hard, the government says that, people were giving up because they were so much cheaper, they were giving up their gas cars prematurely, and that doesn't make it very environmental if you don't use your gas car for the lifetime.
Right. Yeah.
So that was something that they maybe are having second thoughts on, actually, which is interesting and something we can learn about in the rest of the world. Not letting the gas cars run out of their life cycle, and that encourages manufacturing, which is maybe unnecessary. So using less buses, this is interesting to me too, because people are taking cars instead of buses into the city because it's so cheap to operate the EV. It's cheaper than a bus. So they say, well, why should I pay a premium for a bus when I can go on my own little car, listen to my music or do whatever? So they have to respond to that by lowering the prices of bus transport. And they spend a lot on this, Brian. $800 US equivalent are spent per inhabitant on EV subsidies, which is a lot, but it certainly worked. The government is planning on phasing out new incentives because EVs are the new normal now, and they don't really have to make them the new normal anymore. Public level 2 charging used to be free when they started out, and that was a burden on the cities and the municipalities and paid for by the taxpayers. But now there's a small fee to use them. Level 2 is something that you charge into for hours instead of minutes. And it's usually cheaper because it doesn't require a big grid connection. It's something you can even have in your home. So 8% of ICE vehicle sales remaining to eliminate, basically. So it's 92%, I think was the latest figures, had a plug. And they said a lot of that has to do, that last 8% is people who like Toyota. And Toyota, as we know, has bugger all for EVs. They've got one that they aren't really pushing, and that's been problematic on its launch, like many of the other legacy automakers' EVs have been. Toyota's a strong brand there, and not really anything to show for it.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's, brand loyalty in cars can take many, many years to change. And we all know that Toyota has huge brand loyalty. People love Toyota. And since Toyota's not offering EVs, that's, going to take some extra time.
Norway will end the sale of new ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, that is, if you're new to the show, in 2025. Fans are getting a last-minute extension, and around 500,000 vans are registered in Norway. This corresponds to 15% of the entire vehicle fleet, but 27% of the CO2 emissions. Just like trucks are a small percentage, but a big percentage of, emissions.
Yeah. No, we know that vans are going to be a big part of emissions, especially in this sort of new economy where everybody's buying everything off of Amazon.
So the thing that I take away from this, for the most part, though, is the comments about the air. They call it an EV utopia in Norway, but the end result that stuck with me was this.
The streets are quiet in Oslo. The air is pleasantly free of fumes.